The final item of business today is the members' business debate on motion number 7188 in the name of Gordon MacDonald on Al-Anon family groups supporting families with alcohol-related issues. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be most grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Gordon MacDonald to open the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before I begin, can I thank my fellow MSPs who have supported this motion, enabling it to achieve cross-party support and allowing this debate to take place. I'll also take the opportunity to welcome to the gallery members of Al-Anon family groups and also the health professionals who are attending the debate prior to this evening's event. So, what is Al-Anon family groups? Why is it needed today, and what makes it unique? Al-Anon family groups is a community resource providing support for those people affected by someone else's drinking. It is a fellowship of relatives and friends of alcoholics who share their experience in order to solve their common problems. Al-Anon is there for anyone who requires support, as it does not have any religious or political affiliations and is multiracial. Al-Anon family groups began as an informal meeting of the close relatives of recovering alcoholics. Alcoholics Anonymous had begun in Ohio in 1935, and members of that group started taking along their wives for support. The wives realised that they all shared the same problem of living with an alcoholic. It was while they talked to each other that they realised that they too had been affected and also needed a programme of recovery. By 1951, there were so many family groups associated with Alcoholics Anonymous that it was decided to create a separate organisation which became Al-Anon family groups. The first meeting of Al-Anon in the UK took place in Belfast in 1951, with Glasgow following on several years later. There are now approximately 125 meetings in Scotland, and within the UK and the Republic of Ireland, there are now 800 family support groups. So what's the extent of alcohol dependency problem? The organisation Scottish Health Action on Alcohol Problems highlights on its website the background to the issue. Over the past 50 years, the price of alcohol has continually fallen to the extent that certain retailers currently sell alcohol, ostensibly a dangerous drug, as a loss leader simply to encourage the sale of other products. Added to this is the fact that alcohol is available in many parts of the UK 24 hours a day, and it is again local supermarkets and convenience stores that are reaping the benefits of this relaxation of trade. The majority of sales of alcohol are no longer limited to the bars and off-licence. It then highlights that 1/4 of the UK's population are now classed as harmful drinkers. The World Health Organization report, Global Status Report on Alcohol and Health, published in 2011, states that in the UK, pure alcohol consumed per year per person reached 13.4 litres, higher than the European average of 12.2 litres, which in itself is double the worldwide average of 6.1 litres. The fact sheet issued by the World Health Organization on alcohol, dated February 2011, outlines the extent of the problem and its effect on society. The harmful use of alcohol is a global problem which compromises both individual and social development. It results in 2.5 million deaths worldwide each year. It also causes harm far beyond the physical and psychological health of the drinker. It harms the well-being and health of people around the drinker. An intoxicated person can harm others or put them at risk of traffic accidents or violent behaviour, or negatively affect co-workers, relatives, friends or strangers. Thus, the impact of the harmful use of alcohol reaches deep into society. It is with this background that Al-Anon family groups has continued to grow and now provides support in 115 countries and has a worldwide group membership of approximately 24,000. Scotland has had for decades a difficult relationship with alcohol. Alcohol sales data suggests that consumption has increased by 11% since 1994. We have 50% of prisoners who were drunk at the time of their offence, and the alcohol-related hospital charges have quadrupled since the early 1980s. The impact of this excessive consumption is estimated to cost Scots £3.6 billion each year. That's equivalent to £900 for every adult in Scotland. It was with this background that the Scottish Parliament passed the Alcohol Minimum Pricing Scotland Act in June 2012, making it possible at a future date the introduction of minimum pricing for alcohol. Now, there are many organisations and charities in Scotland who are involved in supporting or helping alcoholics and their families. However, what makes Al-Anon family groups unique is that it is self-supporting through voluntary contributions of its members. There are no dues or fees, and the organisation does not accept any outside funds, grants or donations. The Al-Anon programme is based on confidentiality, and people who take part develop a sense of trust, allowing them to speak confidentially and honestly about their issues relating to living with someone who suffers from alcohol dependency. Someone else's drinking can turn love to hate, bring you to the depths of despair, affect you financially, lead to violent outbursts, make you doubt your sanity, and make you think that you are the problem. Al-Anon doesn't offer advice or counselling, but members give each other understanding, strength and hope as a result of their shared experiences. To conclude, Presiding Officer, the World Health Organization is due to update its alcohol consumption figures per country this year, and we can only hope that it shows a decline in our drinking habits. One pointer to what those figures may show for Scotland is that in 2012 there were 1,080 alcohol-related deaths, and although that is 80% higher than what it was in the mid-80s, it has, however, declined substantially since the high point of 2006, when 1,540 deaths from alcohol was the largest ever recorded. Regardless of how the World Health Organization updated figures change, Al-Anon family groups will be there to provide support for the family members, whether that person is still drinking or not, for many years to come.
Thank you very much. We now turn to the open debate. Speeches of 4 minutes, please. And I call Anne McTaggart to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I am delighted to contribute to this debate on the important subject of families affected by alcohol-related issues. And I commend Gordon MacDonald, MSP, for securing this time in the Chamber to congratulate Al-Anon family groups on their fantastic work in supporting families affected by alcoholism. As a former addiction counsellor with the Glasgow Council on Alcohol, I understand the devastating impact that drug and alcohol dependencies can have not only on the individuals, but their families and their community. The reality is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to dealing with the causes and consequences of alcohol abuse, and Al-Anon hosts meetings and support groups all across the UK in order to allow friends and the families of those who abuse alcohol to share experiences and work together to solve common problems. There are over 800 of these support groups operating in the UK and Ireland, 120 of which are based across Scotland. I know from my experience that this kind of work is absolutely vital in addressing many of the underlying causes of alcoholism and bring communities together in pursuit of achieving shared goals. Social work services in each of our 32 local authorities will rely on and do rely on organisations like Al-Anon to work in partnership with the public sector, making the best use of the scarce resources in this challenging economic circumstance. Al-Anon family groups have carried out their work for over 60 years and yet receive no external financial support from either the Scottish Government or local authorities, as my colleague mentioned earlier. And yet, in some of our most deprived communities and with some of our most vulnerable and individuals in society, they do this work. Presiding Officer, I would like to thank the Al-Anon family groups for their dedication to improving the lives of those struggling with alcohol-related issues and commend the excellent and outstanding work they carry out in Scotland and the rest of the UK to improve the lives of vulnerable individuals, their families and also the wider community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Nanette Milne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank my colleague Gordon MacDonald for securing this debate. Members across the Chamber are aware of the impact alcohol misuse has in Scotland and the grievous effect it has on families, local communities and the need to challenge this socially destructive addiction. My own father died as a result of his alcoholism, and I remember years when I did not see him sober from month to month, so much of this debate has a personal resonance. Alcohol consumption in Scotland is amongst the highest in Europe, with Scottish Government figures suggesting half of men and a third of women regularly drink above recommended weekly limits. With misuse comes a plethora of health-related issues ranging from short-term alcoholic poisoning to long-term kidney and liver failure. Mental health issues may be severe, with depression and dependency being potentially long-lasting. Of course, whilst personal side effects are well known, the problems caused by alcohol misuse go deeper, impacting on local communities, the NHS, criminal justice and wider society. The causes of high consumption include availability of cheap, strong alcohol, coupled with special offers available in shops. This has normalised consumption, allowing it to become an everyday necessity for many. This normalisation, however, touches individuals, families, communities and society. This morning I addressed a well-attended conference of Glasgow Council on Alcohol to launch a new service designed as a direct result of my members' debate on the origins of addiction on the 8th of January this year. At the launch, Richard Velleman, Emeritus Professor of Mental Health Research, discussed the huge scale of alcohol misuse and the negative impact on individual families and children, specifically on family finances, on social life, routines, rituals, roles and communication within the family. Problems such as domestic and other types of violence, child abuse, instability and embarrassment may have to be faced, along with denial, living in fear, parental inconsistency and instability, leaving children to deal with problems relating to disturbed family functioning, conflict and breakdown. For the children, unsurprisingly, antisocial behaviour, emotional difficulties, precocious maturity and problems with schoolwork and a difficult transition from adolescence can emerge. In the long term, adults who grew up in such households are more likely to have physical illnesses ranging from gynecological to ischemic heart disease, diabetes and musculoskeletal disorders. Prolonged traumatic childhood stress, caused or heightened by alcohol misuse in the family, can damage the autonomous and sympathetic nervous systems, making one increasingly vulnerable to pain and infections through a weakened autoimmune response. However, whilst children can have very damaged lives stemming from alcohol misuse in the family, the overwhelming majority do not, as Professor Velleman made clear this morning. Children are often highly resilient. Protective factors, most importantly a close bond with a caring adult, a good network of wider family support, an outside hobby or activity of any description, are vital to ensure a counterbalancing stability, attachment and security, as opposed to unpredictability, insecurity and isolation. We must build on this and reach out to the children who need such support. I therefore pay tribute to Scotland's 120 Al-Anon family groups and the vital work that they do. Education and support for those who misuse alcohol are essential aspects of rehabilitation, and it is important to mention the vital work done by alcohol support groups across Scotland. Care groups, agencies and charities help addicts face their issues head-on, looking not just at the addiction itself but the causes underlying it. It may be mental health related or an issue of sexual abuse. Use of counselling, relapse and family support, amongst others, are just some of the methods of support provided. I am aware of the work alcohol and drugs partnerships do in my own constituency, and I am encouraged by their dedication. The positive contribution of Al-Anon family groups is immeasurable, and I wholeheartedly applaud their continuing works. Help and support is necessary to overcome addiction and provide the aid and relief to those adversely affected. I believe that in order to end the vicious cycle of addiction, more action is essential to support and safeguard our current and future generations' health and prosperity.
Thank you very much. I now call Nanette Milne to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, in this chamber we frequently discuss the dangers of alcohol in terms of what it does to an individual's health, whether that be liver damage, premature death by poisoning, long-term brain disorders or many other effects that overconsumption can cause. We also highlight in debates the strain put on our NHS services, particularly in our A&E departments, by people presenting who are intoxicated and badly injured, requiring treatment immediately, often at the expense of other patients with serious conditions not caused by alcohol. I was struck by BBC Breakfast News last week, which covered this subject, pointing to one individual who'd been admitted to hospital over 230 times in less than 2 years with injuries as a result of alcohol. However, this debate rightly focuses on the effect that alcohol has on those around problem drinkers, which perhaps doesn't receive the necessary attention it deserves. I therefore thank Gordon MacDonald for tabling the motion before us this evening. I think we'd be hard-pressed to find any adult in Scotland, the UK, or indeed the wider world who hasn't heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, if the same question was put to people as to whether they'd heard of Al-Anon family groups, we would probably receive a different answer. Set up over 60 years ago in New York by the wife of the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, the aim of this support network is to offer strength and hope for friends and relatives of problem drinkers by sharing experiences and offering mutual help. Never is the expression, "no one knows what goes on behind closed doors," more relevant than when it's applied to families who live with an alcoholic. Often wives and husbands endure years of domestic abuse, often brought on by drink-fueled violence, with nearly half of all incidents caused by people under the influence of alcohol or who are alcohol dependent. These cases, sadly, are frequently unreported, with family members of the alcoholic either feeling embarrassed to report such incidents or too often feeling that they themselves are the problem. Of course, domestic abuse brought on by a problem drinker isn't restricted to physical violence. There's also the financial burden placed on families or friends who find themselves in debt or acting as cash machines to fund an individual's alcohol addiction. While Al-Anon can't provide financial help, and as the motion states, it is a charity which isn't funded externally, it does provide an environment in which those closest to an alcohol-dependent individual are able to share their difficulties with others in similar situations. Perhaps the greatest endurance for families and friends of an alcoholic is the emotional strain placed on people. This can be the feeling of helplessness, of seeing someone you care about becoming someone unrecognisable as the person he or she once was. And sadly, there's the tendency for love for that person to turn to hate and the guilt and despair associated with such emotions. That's why grassroots groups such as Al-Anon are so important in facilitating meetings to showing those affected that the range of emotions experienced are understandable and that they themselves aren't responsible for the alcohol dependency of a family member or friend. Scotland is particularly supportive of the aims and works of Al-Anon, with over 120 groups meeting on a regular basis, 6 of which take place in my region of the North East, including 3 in my hometown of Aberdeen. Finally, I would like to touch on the equally important role played by Al-Anon, a support group founded in 1957 by a Californian teenager whose father was a recovering alcoholic and whose mother was a member of Al-Anon. Al-Anon, which was established in Britain in the 1960s, is there for 12 to 17-year-olds growing up in an environment where a family member is alcohol dependent. This is a crucial stage in the life of a teenager when all sorts of emotions are taking place and changes are occurring both physically and mentally. The addition of the presence of alcoholism in others in a teenager's life can have a devastating effect when someone is so vulnerable. Al-Anon shows young people that, quite simply, they're not alone. Presiding Officer, this debate is timely when alcohol abuse is affecting so many lives, young and old, in Scotland, and I would commend Gordon MacDonald for bringing it to the Chamber. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call Stuart Stevenson to be followed by Jean Urquhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Al-Anon for creating the opportunity for the debate and Gordon MacDonald in bringing it to the Chamber here. Alcohol is one of these unusual drugs, because that is what it is, in that its effect on people is quite varied. For some people, the lowering of inhibitions, the increasing in confidence, leads to an increase in creativity. For others, that lowering of inhibitions and increasing confidence leads into far less productive areas. And of course, excess use of alcohol leading in due course to addiction is destructive of family life, is destructive of relationships, and ultimately destructive of the addict themselves. My father was a country GP, and like all GPs, he had his catalogue of alcoholics. And in the 1950s and early 60s, he never felt that he had the kind of remedies at his disposal that really delivered the kind of results that he sought. When I was old enough to drive, provided some pastoral support to some of his alcoholics, and others in the family did the same. But the outcomes were not really particularly good. When I became a manager of staff, some hundreds of staff in the 1970s, 80s and onwards, I, of course, once again met people who were suffering from the consequences of alcohol misuse. But by this time, the existence of support groups such as Al-Anon, the professional support that was available, had transformed the outcomes for those who were affected by alcohol. So that I can say that the majority of people that we were able to refer to professional services and connect to support groups had substantially better outcomes. We understand addictions better now than we used to. They come in many forms. Alcohol is merely one of them. But of course, let's not imagine this is a new problem. The Canadian historian T.C. Smout, in his Social History of Scotland, describes how in the mid-1800s, in a village in East Lothian, there was one pub for every 14 inhabitants in that village. And that tells you something about the place of alcohol in that community. And about that time, it was recognized in the Swedish town of Gothenburg that the evils of drink were affecting wider society. And the community in Gothenburg got together and opened their own pub so that the profits from the trade could be recycled into more useful activities. And to this day, in various towns across Scotland, you will still see pubs called The Goth. And that comes from the Gothenburg experiment that came from Sweden. Drink has probably seen genetic changes, particularly in England, where beer was a substitute for water because there was not good supplies of potable water in many of our cities, and tolerance of alcohol has grown. But the trouble is, as others less adapted have used alcohol, we've seen a disproportionate effect on that. Relationships are affected not just by the immediate consumption of alcohol, but the change in behaviours that there are. People become secretive about their addiction, and that cuts them off from their families and friends. So groups like Al-Anon are absolutely vital to preserving and growing relationships, supporting people with addiction. I hope, Presiding Officer, that they continue to support communities across Scotland and beyond.
Thank you very much. I now call Jean Urquhart to be followed by Roderick Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks very much to Gordon MacDonald for bringing this debate. And I must say, of all the topics that might come back and back and back again into the Parliament, I think this is something that is such a big issue in Scotland because of our relationship with alcohol that I hope that the debate is secured on an annual basis, at least, that we can talk about Al-Anon openly in this chamber. Like most folk in Scotland, we all have, relatives or friends who live abroad, and so we do. Most of us have an alcoholic in the family or in our circle of friends. Not understanding alcoholism is the first relationship that most of us will have with that. But getting to understand what's happening to the alcoholic, getting to understand that the symptoms, that the effect that it has on other members of the family. I think I'm right in saying that for every person who's suffering from alcohol addiction, there are 8 or 10 people who are suffering all of the symptoms. So the madness and the irrationality and the extraordinary behaviour of an alcoholic is actually reflected in what becomes the madness and the irrationality of the lives of people who are trying to live with that person. Al-Anon is an organisation that absolutely understands that. And the most extraordinary thing, I think, is the friendships that are made, the understanding of an organisation for the first time of realising, as the alcoholic will, that he or she is sick. So the organisation that befriends, understands, and is constantly there reminding the person suffering from the symptoms of alcoholism is a wonderful organisation to be part of. I think that for the wives and increasingly the husbands who attend Al-Anon, the knowledge that not only are they part of a help group, a self-help group, where it is literally that, a self-help group, but the organisation is truly international. We've heard that AA started in the States, in Ohio, and I think that the organisation really is international. So that wherever you go, there is an Al-Anon meeting. If not that night, the next night, or the following morning, there are Al-Anon friends around the globe, because alcoholism, as we know, every addict is a recovering alcoholic. They're not a recovered alcoholic. So many of us have lived with alcoholism or recovering alcoholism and having had that experience, but nothing settles it like an Al-Anon meeting. So I think the genuine help that comes from Al-Anon is to be welcomed and really delighted that you've brought this debate or raised the issue in the Parliament, because for many hundreds of thousands of people across Scotland who still don't know about Al-Anon, let's try and spread the word about that, because it will bring incredible comfort. And I do thank you very much, Gordon MacDonald, for bringing the debate to Parliament today. And I thank those members of Al-Anon who are with us for the work that they have done and continue to do in bringing people to sobriety in Scotland.
Thank you. And finally, in the open debate, for a call the Minister, Roderick Campbell.
Presiding Officer, I too would like to welcome the opportunity to participate in this debate, and I congratulate Gordon MacDonald on securing it. We've heard already of some of the excellent work that the 120 Al-Anon family groups do in communities throughout Scotland, including my own constituency of North East Fife. That same part of the world, I think, where Stuart Stevenson's father was a country GP. I was delighted to sponsor a parliamentary exhibition for the group earlier in the year, and I know that the vast majority of MSPs stopped to speak to the exhibitors and find out about the work they do. I know that they were very grateful for the support the Parliament showed them on that occasion. I'm certain that there are few in this chamber who would deny the scourge that alcohol has a potential in this country, with Mark Robinson of NHS Scotland recently announcing that despite an 8% fall in drink sales last year, we're still drinking too much as a nation. I'm also certain that nobody in this chamber will be unaware of the damage alcohol can do, both to those who overuse alcohol and those who feel the effects of it. Last year, the reduction in alcohol sales of beer since 2009 was the equivalent of 35 million pints. Despite that, alcohol sales in Scotland, as Gordon MacDonald's already mentioned, are higher than they were in 1994, and sales of vodka per person in particular were twice as high in Scotland compared to south of the border. Whilst I welcome the reduction in overall alcohol sales, more needs to be done, both for those suffering directly and indirectly. There is a broad range of support and guidance for those who directly suffer the effects of alcohol misuse, and it's proper and correct that this is the case. There are numerous, arguably too many, high-profile cases of alcoholism negatively impacting on individuals. The author Stephen King, the actor Robert Downey, and, of course, the former First Lady Betty Ford, to name just a few. What all of these people have in common is that they accepted interventions from their friends and family to help them combat their addictions, and they all recovered. I'm sure we all appreciate the strength and courage required to carry out these interventions, and that their families would have required significant support to help them through the process. Whilst there's a broad range of support for alcoholics, the effects alcoholism can have on people's family and friends is often less clear, in particular where alcoholics' families can go to for support. Presiding officer, that's where voluntary organisations such as Al-Anon family groups can be of such significant benefit. The relatives of alcoholics don't just need counselling or advice. They need compassion from people with a level of understanding, from people who've gone through what they're going through, and from people who've been negatively affected by another person's alcoholism. Al-Anon don't offer solutions, but they offer, as Gordon MacDonald has said, understanding, strength and hope. In addition, they also offer support and solidarity. They offer not only a listening ear, but an understanding ear. They offer the courage for people to continue the seemingly endless battle against another person's alcoholism. Presiding officer, I named 3 recovered alcoholics earlier. They've all gone on to considerable success, becoming more famous and wealthy than most of us in this chamber can imagine of. Betty Ford even set up a renowned clinic in her name to help alcoholics and their family members recover. Before doing that, however, she, just like every other alcoholic, relied on the support of her family to help her recover from her addiction. And her family, like those of any other alcoholic, saw and felt the worst effects of alcoholism. Whilst these individuals may not have had the support of Al-Anon family groups specifically, I'm delighted that Al-Anon have a presence throughout Scotland, in Edinburgh, North East Fife and beyond. Without the ongoing support of groups such as Al-Anon, countless numbers of people would struggle in silence as they watch a family member tear their lives and the lives of those around them apart. I welcome Al-Anon's continued presence, but hope that one day they won't need as large a presence, and that Scotland can finally rid itself of the damaging aspects of its drinking culture and drink-related early deaths. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Can I now invite Michael Matheson to respond to the debate? Minister, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I, like others, offer my congratulations to Gordon MacDonald in securing time for this debate and bringing to the Chamber the important work of Al-Anon and the role that they play in tackling the issue of alcohol misuse within our society. I thought in Gordon MacDonald's contribution he set out very well the valuable support that Al-Anon provide to anyone whose life is or has been affected by someone else's drinking. And it's just as important for those affected by someone else's drinking to receive support as those who are affected by problematic drinking in itself. So it's an extremely invaluable role. We are already acutely aware of the damaging effects that excessive alcohol consumption has on individuals, families and communities. And a number of members in their contribution have made reference to this. Scotland's drink problem is now significantly worse than the rest of the UK. We drink almost a fifth more than the English and Welsh, fueling the much higher levels of alcohol-related harm. And the statistics are very stark in this area. Alcohol-related hospital discharges in Scotland have quadrupled since the early 1980s, and Scotland has one of the fastest growing chronic liver disease and psoriasis rates in the world. Now, as a government, we have made a very significant level of investment since 2008 into local services to prevent alcohol-related problems occurring and to provide treatment and support for those who already have a problem. We have long said that there is no single solution to help change Scotland's relationship with alcohol, and the alcohol framework outlines a package of some 40+ measures to tackle alcohol-related harm, including one which we believe is important in this area, that of minimum unit pricing. In our framework, we recognise families and communities as one of the 4 areas for sustained action, alongside reducing consumption, encouraging more positive attitudes and positive choices, and improving treatment and support services across the country. Now, we also know, and what today's debate, I think, has highlighted, is that it's not just who drinks too much that are affected. Alcohol misuse impacts negatively on people around drinkers, such as families, friends and communities themselves. We know that alcohol misuse impacts on children living with parents with a drink problem. We know heavy drinking is a common factor in family breakup. And we know that the impact of our excessive consumption of alcohol is estimated to cost some £3.6 billion each year. That breaks down into £900 for every adult in Scotland. And we need to better understand the full extent of alcohol-related harm in our communities in order to tackle what is a complex and at times ingrained problem. A new research study by Alcohol Focus Scotland is seeking to investigate the harm caused by alcohol to people other than drinkers themselves. The study started in September last year and is due to be published very shortly. The Scottish Government has contributed funding towards this, but no doubt it will help to provide us with a clearer insight into the true impact that overconsumption of alcohol can have on the wider community. And I've got no doubt that the information will reinforce important work carried out by groups such as Al-Anon. We've also taken a range of action to provide support to others impacted by alcohol misuse. Alcohol and drug partnerships were set up in 2009 and are responsible for developing local strategies for tackling problems such as alcohol and drug use and promoting recovery. They also take into account the impact that problem alcohol and drug use has on families and the need for related services to provide appropriate support. I'll give way to Mr Finney.
John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the Minister for giving way. You talked about local interventions, Minister. Would you accept there's a challenge globally with the targeting of young people by the drinks industry, particularly using social media? Minister.
I think there is a range of measures that have to take, and advertising is one of the key issues. And the challenge, I think, that the member makes correctly points out is in social media, because trying to control social media is much more difficult than it is for the general media in itself. But yes, it clearly is a growing area, and it's one which we are considering as part of our own alcohol policy in going forward. This year, the Government's provided some £38 million of funding to support their alcohol and drug partnerships in the area of alcohol work. And importantly, for those who want to take up early intervention if they have an alcohol problem, is to make sure that they get timely, quick access to the support and treatment they require. And that's why I'm particularly pleased that the target for access to drug and alcohol treatment was exceeded at a national level at 94.6%, with people waiting less than 3 weeks or less to receive appropriate treatment. There's clearly a range of other policy areas that can have a direct impact on helping to support those families and their children in addressing any alcohol misuse problem within their own household. In particular, if I could highlight the action related within the child affected by parental substance misuse, which focuses on reducing impact on children through preventative and early interventions, and to strengthen support for families and the intermediate risks that they may be associated with. As a Government Presiding Officer, we recognise the ongoing challenges that overconsumption of alcohol has on Scottish society. As I've mentioned earlier, there is no single solution to this. We need to take forward a range of measures, and Al-Anon provide an invaluable role in helping to support those families and individuals who have been affected by someone's misuse of alcohol. I wish them well in their ongoing work, and I've got no doubt that they will continue to provide important support to communities across the country.
Thank you very much, Minister. And that concludes Gordon MacDonald's debate on Al-Anon family groups. And I now close this meeting of Parliament.